Today we begin to talk about writing skills. Writing, as you know, is a very difficult activity. In fact, most of us second language learners of English or the second language users of English find writing very difficult, partly because it's a formal activity and also because it requires specific training for us. To speak about this topic, about writing skills, we have with us in the studios today Professor Meera Manvi. She is Professor of English at Osmania University. Welcome, Professor Meera Manvi, to the studios here today. And we also have Dr. Amali Raj from CIFL, from the Central Institute of English and Foreign Languages. She will be talking to us. She is one of the course contributors. She will be speaking to us about writing skills in some detail, about telegraphic skills. Welcome to both of you to the studios.
Thank you.
We shall begin to talk about writing in 2-3 different ways. Let me just tell you first that writing skills can be seen as 3 types of activities. First, writing can be perceived as a mechanical process. What do we mean by a mechanical process? We mean that it is merely writing as an activity of putting down words on paper. Very often we do that when we write notes, when we write down or take down notes from the blackboard. Writing as a language process, which means perhaps writing an essay or writing a paragraph. The third type of activity under writing skills is writing for communication, and perhaps our focus will be primarily here today. May I now request Professor Meera Manvi to begin by talking about the types of writing that we have.
As Dr. Pushpa has already told you, writing is in fact one of the really difficult skills that we think of teaching or learning. When we think of the different stages of writing, Dr. Pushpa has already explained the different types of writing. I mean, writing as a mechanical process, or writing as a language process, or language for communication. But when you think about the stages of writing, you think of 3 stages which go from simple to complex. For example, when a student is just beginning to write, we would have to have him or her write in a very controlled situation. What does that mean? That means that we are giving all the input. We are giving vocabulary, we are giving structures, we are giving the words, we are probably even giving ideas. And that's the initial stage when a student is just taking the first steps into this very difficult task of learning how to write. The second stage is somewhat midway between controlled writing and guided writing. So we move on next to guided writing, where we give some input, so that we might give some ideas, we might give some structures, but then the student does have some freedom in using these and bringing in some creativity in order to create this task of writing. But what we would ideally like you to move towards when you move towards writing for communication is to be able to do free writing. That is to say, there are very little inputs, and you are able to use structures, you are able to use ideas, you are able to use vocabulary to create your own writing task. Let us move on now a little bit to different types of writing. So why do we write? Why do we write? The first kind is expressive writing. Now, in expressive writing, it's the emotions which are paramount. So we are thinking perhaps of writing personal notes where we express our emotions to people, or diaries, which would be a record again of our feelings and emotions, or letters. Now here, these would perhaps be personal letters where our own feelings and opinions are extremely important. We next move on to another type of use of writing, which would be for transactional purposes. So a transactional purpose really is a give and a take. So you're giving information or receiving information. For example, you might write a letter which would be very informative. So it's not a personal letter, doesn't express emotions, but gives you information. Similarly, other examples would be memos or reports. Last of all, we also have poetic writing. Now, not many of us use this mode of writing, but this is the mode of writing that is used by creative writers, authors, anybody who writes, wants to put forward his ideas, her ideas creatively, and then take them to a larger audience, share it with a larger audience. Let me take you on now to the different modes of writing. And there are basically 5 different modes of writing. Let me enumerate them a little bit and then go on to some kind of a look at what are the different situations in which we might want to write. So we might think of narrative writing, narration. We might think of descriptive writing, description. We might think of expository writing, exposition. We might think of persuasive writing, persuasion. And we might also think about argumentative writing or argumentation. Now, I take you on to different questions for the writer. So, what are the situations in which the writer might want to write? For example, if I were to ask a question, what is the meaning of X? Or how do I define X? What does X mean? I'm thinking about a function that is definition. So my writing purpose is to define something. I might also think about the various features of X. What is X like? What are the adjectives I might use to describe X? So this would be description or descriptive writing. I might move on to the components. What are the different parts that make up X? In this case, I'm using analysis to show you what X is made up of. What are the different elements that go into the making up of X that I'm writing about. I can also write about a process. A process would be, how is X made? How is X done? For example, how do I cook? How do I play a game? How do I how do I drive a car? What is the process? So that is one more activity that I might want to write about, process writing. Then I can think of another mode of writing where I think about giving directions. How to? What are the different modes, what are the different steps I need to follow in order to make or do something. The essential functions of something, in which case I think about a functional analysis. I could think about the causes of something or the effects of something happening, in which case I think about a causal analysis. I can think also of writing about classification. How do I classify a particular thing? So all of these basically, add up again to the 5 different modes that we talked about. We talked about narration, we talked about description, we talked about exposition, we talked about persuasion, and we also talked about argumentation. We next move on to some of the keys of effective writing. And here I think we are on very, very slippery ground, because this is where we need to be really very careful about the way in which we write. I think one of the first basic steps that we need to take when we think about effective writing would be correctness of language. Now, correctness of language, this goes hand in hand with our general awareness of language. So whether we are speaking or writing, we need to be very, very careful about correct grammatical use, appropriate language use. We also think about the content when we are thinking about what to write about. We don't want to be irrelevant. We would like to write about, we keep to the topic and be relevant and adequate. We also think next, when we think about writing, we think about cohesion and coherence. Remember that writing is basically a reflection of your thought processes, and because your thought processes are reflected in your writing, you need to be a very clear thinker. And if your thinking is clear, then probably you will be able to write in a way in which your writing would be clear and cohesive. It's really like removing the hurdles from a road. You have somebody walking and you want to make sure that there are no puddles, there are no hurdles, there are no stones on the way, so that when the person walks, he or she can walk very easily with great facility over the road. So your writing should be like this, that you shouldn't have any spots where there are unclear or fuzzy ideas or fuzzy structure. Your aim should be towards simplicity and lucidity. And last of all is the question of style. Now, style, of course, can be very, very personalized, but basically what we are looking for at the very basic level is to have a style which is appropriate to your content, appropriate to the subject that you are dealing with. So if your subject is a very serious one, then probably you want to have a kind of style that would match your subject matter. So we can probably now move on to...
So in fact you're saying that one should not use an informal style in a formal situation.
In a formal situation.
You don't expect that somebody would use non-serious language in a serious situation. And if that happens, it can do two things. One, it can create a misunderstanding, or it can create humor. Many of our writers, for instance, tend to create humor by using a non-serious style in a serious situation.
In a serious situation, yes.
So these are the kinds of tips you would like to give to our students about writing effectively. Can we now turn to Dr. Amli Raj? Could you tell us about the using telegraphic language? Because I know that we have in our course material, we have included a section which tells you how to write telegraphic language and write short messages, because we thought we should begin there. In fact, that's where many of us go wrong. We do not know how to abridge our language and how to present it effectively. Dr. Amli Raj, may I now request you to speak about that?
Yeah, I think Meera has been talking to you about writing in general, the different things that you have to keep in mind while conveying information to somebody. Now, I'm coming down to something very specific, that is writing messages for a particular purpose. And here the purpose is for writing a telegram. Basically what we are writing is for writing a telegram. Now when we write telegrams, now before we go on to describing how to write a message for a telegram, etc., there are certain basic things that we have to talk about. Now first of all, when you are talking about writing a message or a short message, you should ask yourself, what am I doing? Am I writing for the purposes of communication, or am I writing to give a short message, etc.? Very often in our experience, in our daily experience, we have to write short messages for different purposes. Now it might be to give information to someone about something, or an important meeting, or an important message, or whatever it may be. Now when we come down to writing messages for a telegram, there are 2 or 3 things that we have to come down to very specifically. Now I'll take you through 3 important questions that we have to keep in mind when we write messages, or when we write short messages for a telegram. The first one says, why are telegraphic messages written? The second one, how can we describe telegraphic messages? And the third one, how can we write telegraphic messages? Now let's look at the first 2. Why are telegraphic messages written, and how can we describe telegraphic messages? Now when we ask the first question of ourselves, now when you begin to write, as Meera has already told you, what we are keeping in mind is the meaning that we have to convey to a certain person. Now the communication aspect of the message. Now, so when we write a telegram also, this is very important. For instance, very often we do not have the time to write a letter to somebody, and you might have to give a very important message to this person. So a telegram becomes very handy because it helps you convey the message to the person in a very short time. And besides, another advantage is that it is very cheap. I mean, it is faster than a letter. I mean, it reaches the person faster than a letter. Now, when we say that a telegram reaches a person faster than a letter, it also means that we have to pay a little more than we would normally pay for a letter. So, keeping this in mind, our message has to be very, very short. One, because the message has to be clear, and two, because you have to pay for every word that you write on the telegram. So, let's spend some time looking at how we write a telegram from these two aspects. That is, how do I condense the message, and how do I give the message or get across my message as clearly as I can. So, let's start with a few examples here. Now, if you look at the first example that we have here for you. Now, the first telegram says, "Coming home Thursday, Meena." Now, let's stop a while and ask ourselves three important questions based on the telegram. Now, these questions will help you to look at how the message is written and how it is condensed, or how well it conveys the meaning. Now, look at question number 1. Who is sending the message? So, we know that Meena is sending the message. Now, what is the information conveyed in the message? It says that she is coming home on Thursday. And the third question says, to whom is the message addressed? Now, here we can make or we can guess and say that probably she is sending the message to her parents or to someone in her family. And if you look at the second one again, please send books to new address 4x4 Tambaram, Chennai, Bhaskaran. And so again, if you ask ourselves the same questions that we asked earlier, namely, who is sending the message? The answer again here is Bhaskaran. What is the information conveyed in the message? That the books have to be sent to the new address, which is 4x4 Tambaram, Chennai. And to whom is the message addressed? And here again you make a guess, and probably you say it is either to a bookseller or to a publisher. So, as you can see from the examples, people write telegrams to different people for different purposes. But looking at the telegram, most of us can guess what the message is and to whom it is sent, etc. And the more clear your message is, it is better for the person who gets the message to read the message accurately without any misunderstanding. Now, as we said just now, I stressed for you this aspect of clarity. Now, since clarity is very important, not only because we have to pay for the message, but because we can be easily misunderstood in a telegram, it is necessary to spend some time looking at how telegrams are written. So, I'll give you two examples again, which you can look at for yourself, so that we can ask ourselves, how are telegrams different from normal writing? Now, if you look at telegram 1, arriving 14th September, Tuesday. Now, below that, we also have a longer version, a version that you would normally prefer when you're not writing a telegram. Let's say you're talking normally to somebody or you're writing normally to someone. You would say something like, I'm arriving on Tuesday, the 14th of September. And so, what are the things that we've left out in the telegram which we have added in normal writing? Let's spend some time looking at it. Now, if you look at the longer version, you have the words I am, on, the, in addition to the other words which are already there on the telegram. Now, the words am, on, the, I, of, etc. are words which are not really necessary for giving the information. What I mean is, though these words are grammatically very important. Now, all of us know that these words have certain specific functions in grammar, and if you were to write a sentence without these words, it would be wrong. But since our concentration here is on message writing, how do I condense a message? We are looking at only words which convey meaning. So, the words which actually convey meaning are arriving September, Tuesday. Therefore, we leave out words like I, which is a pronoun, am, on, and the, on which is a preposition, and the which is an article. Okay? So, we therefore retain the other words which are necessary for conveying the meaning. Similarly, if you look at telegram 2, interview 2nd February, reserve tickets. Now the longer version says, reserve tickets for my interview on the 2nd of February. Now here again, if you notice, in the longer sentence or in the normal message that we would write, we use words like for, my, and on and off. As you can see again, for, off, on are prepositions. My is a pronoun which we prefer to leave out because they don't actually convey the meaning as well as the other words do. Now, when I said that the other words convey meaning, let's stop for some time and ask ourselves, what are these words that we should choose when we write a message in order to convey the message clearly? Now, if you look at example 1 again, and if you look at example 2 that we just discussed, the words arriving, September, Tuesday, reserve, tickets, February are important words. Now, why are they important words? The words arriving and reserve are verbs. They are action words. Now, when you write a message, these kind of action words are very necessary. So, remember then that when you choose to write your message, remember to use action words because these convey the message to the person. Secondly, nouns which indicate time, place, or a thing, etc., are very important. For example, in your the example that we've given you, you have September, Tuesday, tickets, February, etc., which again are important. In other words, they are nouns which convey meaning. And similarly, we've also to specify dates and time in a telegram. Very often we do this because we have to tell someone about the time something is going to happen or the date that something is going to happen. Therefore, in example 1 you have, for instance, 14th September, and in the second example you have 2nd February. Now you must have also noticed another very important thing when we write a telegram. Now we do not punctuate when we write a telegram, because remember, anything that you add is charged, isn't it? So when we write a telegram, therefore the message is there and it should be very, very precise. And we also don't emphasize capitals, etc., because these are not necessary. They are part of punctuation. In fact, some people prefer to write the whole message in capitals for the sake of clarity. So whatever you do, whatever style you prefer, remember that action words are important, that you have to focus on words that convey the meaning. Any other word which does not add to the meaning has to be left out.
Thank you, Amli, for talking to us, to our students, and telling them about using telegraphic language. I'm not sure how many people still send telegrams, but they would need to compress what they are saying into a shorter form, and I think you have helped them by telling them to use, not to delete action words, and to retain the content words which carry the meaning, because for the meaning to be conveyed you definitely need the content words. May I now request Dr. Meera Manvi to again come back to telling us about what a good writer needs to have. What are the skills of a good writer? Could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, I'll certainly try, Pushpa. Good writing is really a goal that I think we all strive for, even now. Even after doing years and years and years of writing, that's not to discourage students, but that's just to say that we need to keep on practicing, we need to keep on working on it. And let's begin with one of the first skills that we need in order to become a good writer. First of all, a good writer needs to have something to say. So if we don't have any ideas, if we have nothing to say, then we cannot write. Now this used to happen, I remember, in our school days, that we were simply given a topic and we were asked to write something like my hobbies, or something like the school picnic, or how I spent the summer holidays. And that was not something that we really wanted to talk about. This was something that was just forced on us by the teacher. So when we are actually writing for communication, we probably need to have something to say, and we need to have some kind of an opinion about it. We need to have some kind of even feeling or passion about it. So perhaps...
so would you say that we need to do some kind of a discussion maybe?
Yes.
some sort of brainstorming, what we
yes,
call
yes,
brainstorming, maybe
yes.
a discussion.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's not as if I'm writing only because, or I don't need to have just my own personal feelings and write about it, but I could also talk to my friends, a group of people. And
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that one gets inputs not just from one's own opinions, but one gets inputs from so many people, so many sources. And the other thing is that I think this we could connect with the second point, that is to say, keeping the audience in mind, keeping our readership in mind. Who are we writing for? Who are we writing for? So when we think of that, maybe we kind of tailor our ideas to suit the audience, to suit our readership. Would you agree?
yes, I think so. So being aware of the reader is again another point about
Yes.
it's important when we are talking to know who we are going to address.
Yes.
Right.
For instance, a teacher needs to know what the level of the student is going to be like. Similarly,
Yes.
I think it's important to know who my reader is going to be. If it's a common reader, like if it's a newspaper article which
Right.
everybody is going to read,
Right.
I'm sure the style of writing will vary
Absolutely.
from the person who's going to read it. It depends
Yes.
on who's going to look
Yes.
at what I have written. If it's a letter, for
If
instance,
it's a
let's
letter,
take the
yes.
example of a personal
Exactly.
letter. If I'm writing a personal letter to a member of my family, to
Right.
someone who is very close to me, the language I use will differ from the language I'm going to use in a formal situation.
Absolutely. And also I think even cultural questions, for example, if I'm writing for somebody who belongs to my own state or my own culture, then maybe I wouldn't take the trouble to explain certain things.
So you would assume a lot.
I
You'd
would assume, I would make a lot of assumptions. But if I'm writing, say, for a foreign audience, then I'd have to be very careful about explaining things that I would normally take for granted.
For instance, use of words which have come into English from Indian languages.
From Indian
Maybe
languages.
we cannot expect that foreign reader would be familiar with
Would
them.
be familiar
We
with
have this
these.
very often amongst Indian writers in English.
Yes.
For example, Mulk Rajanand,
Mulk Rajanand.
a very famous example
Yes.
of a person who uses Indian words.
Yes.
But a person who's writing notes on the book would
Right.
probably need to gloss the word
Gloss the
and
word.
explain
Yes.
what the word means. So the writer
Yes.
has to think of the reader, as you
Reader.
just said.
Sing.
Being aware
Yes.
of the reader is very important.
Yes. And Pushpa, you know, it seems to me that not only is it important to have ideas, I mean, now that we assume that we've had a brainstorming session and that we've jotted down a number of ideas that we might like to work with, but it's also very important to be able to develop an idea. So to think of where the idea comes from, what are the different aspects of this idea that we need to think about. And so what do you think we could do to develop ideas?
I think this is a concept, as you just said, you know, it's a new concept which has come into right. New in the sense
Yes.
that perhaps it's about, Amali, would you say it's about 10 years?
Yes, about 10 years
10 or
maybe.
15 years
Right.
old, in the
Yes,
sense
yes,
that when I was studying, for instance,
Yes.
I'm sure I
Yes.
wasn't told so much
Yeah.
to develop my ideas.
Right.
And to,
Yes.
it was almost as if one had to learn it on one's
Yes.
own.
On one's own.
Or look at a model and
Yes.
study.
Yes.
But
Yes.
today we are talking more and more about the sub-skills
Yes.
of
Of
writing,
of
under
writing.
which developing ideas is very
Yes.
important,
Yeah.
which means you have a topic sentence and
Exactly.
a paragraph is about
Right.
a topic sentence,
About a topic
the main
sentence.
topics.
Yes.
Yeah.